All right, we're back. We are WEBD6201. That's client-side scripting in the winter 2020 semester, and it's lesson 2, part 2. We're going to talk about a couple things right now. We're going to be talking about Lab 1, which is something that's going to be due next Friday at midnight. Let me just bring up our Lab 1 details. I want to talk about that first. So again, I'm going to go to DC Connect here. And in our first section, we're going to have our content for week 2. And we're going to talk about our Lab 1 details. All right, so again, if you look up online, there's Lab 1 is DOM manipulation. A lot of this was taken care of yesterday when we basically formed out our project. But let me go into show you the details for Lab 1, because I think that's important to do. So this is like super simple. I mean, this is like, you know, are you alive kind of lab. But really it's a kind of a way of us, you know, kind of testing that, you know, the things that we've been doing. I can kind of evaluate if you're present in class and you've done some JavaScript manipulation of the DOM. So really that's what this lab is all about, DOM manipulation. So the first part of this lab is going to be our site structure, which we really talked about yesterday, which is 5 marks. So that includes things like your folder structure, what I'm looking for in terms of our assets, content, scripts, and so on. And then you know, you're going to scaffold out a basic HTML page, which we talked about yesterday, using Emmet. I recommend that. I think it's easier. And then finally, you're going to grab jQuery, Bootstrap, Font Awesome, and so on using Yarn. And that's what we did yesterday as well. And finally, you're going to add a little Bootstrap navbar, which kind of looks like this, with you know, kind of like the 5-site thing, which is, or 5-page thing: home, products, services, about us, and contact us. So that's really what you're going to start with, and you're going to build that out as part of your project structure. So that's worth 5 marks. Total lab is worth 20 more marks, so that's a good chunk of it, just to make your structure, just to hand in a proper structure. The second part is where the meat and bones of everything is, and the second part of the lab is all around DOM manipulation. So DOM manipulation is worth 8 marks, and again, I think I've put this up for you guys to see over and over again, which is using only JavaScript. So you can't do things like hard code HTML to make this go, right? So using only JavaScript, change the products link found in the nav bar above, so the products link, to projects. So just, you know, swap it out so it says projects instead of products. So that's like an easy one. That's worth 2 marks. Using only JavaScript again, add another link to the nav bar above, named human resources that sits between about us and contact us. And that's a different thing. That's actually inserting a bit of code between these two pieces. We haven't really covered that 100%. I want to cover that today, how to do that. Had a bit of a foible in the first section in terms of doing that, figure that out. And then using only JavaScript, add another nav bar to the bottom of the page that is fixed bottom. That's what is fixed bottom nav bar, and you can look it up on getbootstrap.com, what I'm looking for. Ensure that you include a copyright statement with the current date in the nav bar. Your final nav bar should look something like this. How do I get the C, the little you know, copyright symbol? Do you remember? At copy. At copy. Yeah. So actually, no, it's not copy. It's and copy. I'll be all right. Haha. And copy semicolon. If you put and copy semicolon, then you're going to get the little at symbol there. That's going to come up. So that's really it. I mean, it's a really simple lab worth 5%. Typically, the way I look at it is this. 1% maximum is 1 hour in terms of work. So this whole thing might take you 5 hours of prep and a little bit of work to kind of do. That would be the max. I think that would be even long, 5% for 5 hours. I don't really think it's going to be that long. So then the next part is internal documentation. My ask of you is at the top of your app.js file, you put in your full name, student ID, and the date completed. again, that's worth like 2 marks. This whole thing, just internal documentation, doing it properly is worth 4 marks out of 21. Again, that's like big, right? So just doing proper documentation, and if you just do proper site structure, which we've done kind of yesterday, that's like 4 and 5, 9 out of 21, you're almost passed. And you didn't do any functionality at all. Like that's the way I look at it, right? So really just getting your feet wet, that's what this lab is all about, and to say, hey, I'm alive. The functionality, if you get any of this, if you just get the simple one, the products, you switch to projects, that's 11 out of 21, you passed. I mean, that's how simple this one is. I'm also going to ask you to put your project on GitHub, and I'm going to be talking about GitHub today a little bit, how to do that, the commands to use with GitHub in the command line, and a couple of tools to access Git and GitHub through some kind of user interface. There's a couple tools for that I'll be sharing with you. So again, for 2 marks, if you just put your project up on a repo, use it as a backup, and that's it. No, you're not working with GitHub. You're just doing it one time. 2 marks. You lose 2 marks because the way we would work with GitHub is really as you add a feature, you're going to do another commit. You do another feature, you do another commit. That's how you get all your marks, 4 marks. So from a mark breakdown perspective, and this is not really a rubric, but really, if you think about this, this is where all the marks come from. So 5 for site structure, 8 for functionality, 4 for internal documentation, and 4 for version control. Overall, I would say on a scale of difficulty, this would be a 2. Like this is quite easy to do. But again, it's just getting your feet wet, getting you going. There are a couple of more difficult parts of the lab, which would be this part. This part would be the most difficult part. That would be part 2B, because I'm asking you to put human resources between about us and contact us, and that's kind of takes a little bit extra work, and we'll talk about that a little bit today. All right, so that's your lab. This is due again next Friday. That's January 24th, 2020 at midnight. So lots of time to do that. If you haven't started already, I highly recommend you start because it's a quick thing. You've got part of it kind of started yesterday anyway. You might as well continue and get it all done. Okay? Questions around that? No. Okay. All right, so that's the lab. Let me talk about a little bit about GitHub now, and I'm going to do a little bit of picture drawing as if I'm drawing on the board. So I'm going to use Sketchbook Pro here. So we can imagine that when we use GitHub and Git, first we want to use Git as a version control system locally on my machine, right? So let me just draw, let's suppose this is let's try that again. Let's suppose that this is your computer tower, and I'm just drawing some pictures here, and you've got a monitor here, there's your monitor, and you probably have a keyboard, again, it's kind of like this, there's your keyboard, right? And then what you have is all your files in a folder, and let's suppose in your machine here, right here, you have this little folder, and then you have a bunch of files here that kind of you want to capture. That's your files in your project. And what we want to do with GitHub is issue some commands to get it going. Now you've downloaded Git before, right? This is last week we downloaded Git, but the commands that we want to use are the following. When you first create a Git repository locally, you need to use the Git Init command. And Git Init, what it does is it creates a hidden .git folder, and it puts it inside the same project folder that you're working within. So that's the first command, right? And then afterwards, once you do Git Init, the next command is git add dot. And git add dot, there's other ways to do it. You could also do git add and whatever the file you want to put in. You can do each file individually. Dot says everything inside the project. Okay, so git add dot. And finally, you do a git commit -m for message, and then you can put there's 2 options. One of them is initial commit, and the other one is first commit. And this is for the first time you do a commit on GitHub. So initial commit. Okay, and if I'm going to press OK, I'm going to have that. Those are my basic commands that I'm going to issue. Right, I'm just going to make that a little smaller. Right, and you type this into your terminal window. So that's the stuff to get things going locally. right? So it's the first commands. Now the thing with this, when you do this for the first time, right, and you do this in your command prompt or your terminal if you're a Mac user, what you're going to do is the snapshot, which is what a commit really is, we talked about a commit yesterday, is really going to capture all the files in their default state or base state. That's what's going to happen. And then what we want to do is, as we go forward, we want to continue to do a git add dot. We're going to repeat this over and over again. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back in. Let me just bring up our files here for a layer. And I'm just going to merge them all down. Yeah, so what we want to do here is we want to do this over and over again. So I want to kind of go, let's try that again. We want to try and do these two steps over and over again. I want to do git add dot and then I git commit over and over again, every commit that I do, right? So I can repeat those, right? So we can repeat those two steps, right? That's what I want to do. So repeat those two steps over and over again in order for me to, to continue to keep track of my, protect myself in terms of loss locally. However, one thing is that even if you did this locally and your machine ended up burning down, like somehow, or let's suppose it got stolen, or something happened to it, you couldn't access it that time, or whatever, your files are kind of locked into your machine, right? So we need some other mechanism, and we needed it before, to distribute our repos and share our repositories and our code with other people. And again, the three reasons why we'd use GitHub, and if this is going to be on a test, I'm telling you what it is backup, collaboration, and version control. Those are the three reasons, right? So if we draw a little cloud, let's just use this to draw a little cloud, and again, yeah, it always happens to me when I do this. It's just merged down. So if I draw a little cloud, which represents GitHub over here, so let's suppose, we've got a little cloud here, and then here is the cloud. It's not pretty, but it is what it is. And you have a repository up there. Think about the repository as another little container. So your repository sits inside of your account, and it's only accessible by default by you. And what you want to do is take these files and store it up on the cloud, somewhere where it's not locked into your machine, your local system. And what you want to do, the way to do this is to create a link from your system all the way to the cloud. And this link, right, is called a remote. Okay, so that's the remote. And again, what I want to do here, let's name this a remote. There we go. So the remote, which is this link, again, one thing to note about the remote is it's not persistent. So it's not like this remote is going to always be on at all, right? This remote is only going to be available. It's like a URL. It is a URL, or a URI actually. And the remote is only available when I need to access somehow, whether I'm writing to the repo, and this would be the repo up here. Let's call this the GitHub repository, which is this part up here. There's your GitHub repo, right? So the only time this link is used is when I want to access this repo, either to write to it or read from it. Okay, that's really what I'm going to do. And those commands to read and write, if I want to push, if I push and I do a git push, that really, what I'm doing there is I'm writing to the to GitHub, right? And again, and then when I do it again, if I git pull, then I'm kind of grabbing stuff from GitHub, and I can do both those things for my repository. And there's different reasons to do this. I'm going to talk about this in a second. Again, let's just pull up this little diagram that this little monster that I've created, and let's just. When this happens, there we go. Yeah, so what I want to do now is really this. So if I'm pushing to GitHub, I'm going in this direction, and again, forgive my ugly arrows. And when I'm pulling from GitHub, then I'm going in this direction, which is down towards your machine. So that's really how it works. Git push goes up here, git pull goes down here. And what happens is, when I push up to GitHub for the first time, then what I have is all my files that I had locally get written up here. And this whole thing is let's say, all of my commits that I have so far. I have several commits that I might have on GitHub. If for some reason another collaborator comes in and writes an additional file, maybe this file isn't going to be part of the set that I had originally. So this is where I have to do a git pull, so we're in sync with GitHub, because you can see that this set, let's say, only had 3 files, but I have 4 files up here, another commit, let's say. Well, then I want to pull, and when I do, then it adds that file to my local repo, right? So again, let me just do another little label for us. So this is our local repo. So local repo is this stuff right here on the system, right? And a repo is just a repository, kind of a container for all of our files, if you will. Okay, so that's really what we're doing with Git and GitHub. Okay, so I kind of showed the steps to do that yesterday, but we're going to do it kind of a little bit more today. All right, so I'm going to add more commits to our repository. And if you look up online, our repository up online is github.com/Durham Programmer. That's our account. And then yesterday, we made a repository called WEBD6201 W2020 in the lesson 2B. And you can see that I have one commit. If I click on my commit, you can see that the commit I have, it's called initial commit. That's what I used as a default. And again, the 2 default commits that you can make typically as a convention are initial commit or first commit. Those are the things we use. But it doesn't always have to be that way. Wow, I don't know how you can see that. Can you see that okay? All right. So that's really just an overview of what to do with Git and GitHub. But I'm going to do more about that as we go forward. So let's get back into our code here. So that is, this is our repo online. This is the stuff that we did yesterday. And I'm going to talk about how to pull from GitHub as well, and we're going to do that today. All right, so let's leave this diagram up for a second, and I'm going to go into Visual Studio Code, and let's pull in some stuff from yesterday. That's the things we did yesterday. And remember, what we did was just a recap of what we did yesterday. We kind of went into this. We created a little, some content, very little content. And what I did with our app.js was I injected an h2 tag onto the content. And there's a couple of steps. One step, like we talked about from a DOM manipulation last week, was let's get some kind of hook into my element. That's the first thing I want to do. And usually I want to use get element by ID or get elements by class name. Notice I said elements. Elements, anything plural, from a document object model perspective, returns an array. That's different than a single element, so I won't return a single element. We'll do that today as well, a little bit. All right, so that's what it returns. And so we got a reference to our h2 tag, and then what we did was we created it, and then we set a class attribute with a display value of 6, and we set some text content, and then this whole thing is a virtual element right now. It doesn't really exist on the page until we do this part, until we say content area append child h2. Content area is our hook. It's the place where we're going to put it. Think about this as the parent container, right? Parent container. And then what we want to do is we want to kind of put in place this other tag, right? We also talked about event listeners and event handlers yesterday, which was kind of the main topic of our discussion yesterday, more than just DOM manipulation. We talked about how event listeners and event handlers, that whole model is based on the observer pattern design, which is a design where we have some kind of observer that's observing a subject, and as the subject is changed, if something is modified, the observer detects the change. Usually it's listening or watching for a specific thing to happen. For example, a mouse click, a hover, or something like that, or a button press. And then what we say is it raised an event, or it notifies all the subscribers of the observer, right, that, hey, this event did occur, right? So the notification process is kind of the event listening process here in JavaScript. I'm listening, I raise an event, I notify the handler, and the handler reacts by doing some kind of behavior. That's what happens. And usually the way it works is I attach a listener to a particular element, and I have different kinds of events that I can attach. A click event, a mouse over event, a mouse out event. These are just all mouse events. And then there's different examples of how we can handle the event. This is an inline event handler, and these are named event handlers that I kind of put up over here, right, just outside of my code. Now again, if you look at this, we had a little bit of issue yesterday. One of the issues was when I didn't have my h2 tag defined up here, I kind of defined it in here. Well, then we ran into some scoping issues. And we talked about how if it's inside of a function, whether you have var or let, chances are it's not going to escape that scope. However, if you put it in some other thing, like a curly brace or a for loop, then var doesn't protect you. And that's why I said in our course, we want to always use let or const. Those are the two things we want to use. It's a little easier. And so we defined our h2 tag up here, but when I hovered over, I said, hey, this is any. And any, what does that mean? There's different data types by default in JavaScript. One of them is any. Another one is number. Then there's string. Then there's Boolean. Then there's other ones that we can use as well. And then we said, well, what if we can define something ourselves? Could we define or define a type for our data? And we can't do it in the current version of JavaScript. But we can do it in a language called TypeScript, and I said that we would kind of talk about that maybe later on in the semester, time permitting, right? So that's what we did yesterday as a recap, okay? So this kind of brings you up to date with where we are right now, okay? And then today we talked about our lab, a little bit of GitHub, and what I want to do now is fill in the blanks for the stuff that you don't know how to do when it comes to adding additional kind of code, right? So if I want to, let's just suppose, going back to my index.html, that I want to, we've already done swapping out, the text content. We did that like first day, we did DOM manipulation, we swapped out the text content. So you know how to do that. But what about if I want to add in a kind of an element that kind of hugs between two other elements? How do I do that? So I want to I have an h1 tag, and if I was to run this thing, so if I press up control backtick and I bring up my terminal window and I do light-server and I bring up my server, right? So here's my server, it says hello world, I hover over it, the hover event works, it kind of grows and shrinks. If I click onto it, it changes to blue. A little bit annoying how big it gets, but that's part of the effect that we're trying to match. But between the secondary header and hello world, I want to inject another piece of HTML. And this would take care of your lab where you kind of put things between. How do I do that? Well, one thing to note is that you can get a list of nodes, child nodes that you have. So there's a couple ways to do this. But one thing is to get the parent node and use something called insert before. Okay, now I had some trouble with it last time. Let's see, hopefully I won't have trouble with it this time. So one thing is that you want to try and get a reference to this node, to the parent node. So the parent node here is what we want to kind of add our stuff into. We have a last node that we've added in, which is an h2 tag. Let's suppose that this h2 tag is already in place when the page loads. After the page loads, we inject into the h2 tag. And then what I want to do is between the h2 tag and the h1 tag, I want to add something else, like maybe a paragraph of text. So if we're going to add the paragraph, we need the paragraph to add. That's what we need. We need a hook to hook into, but let's suppose you don't have it. Let's suppose you don't have an ID and you don't want to use the class or anything else to hook into that. We just want to use the existing structure to kind of inject some of our code. How do we do that? I'm just going to close some of this down. So first of all, going back to this then, and I'll leave some of these event handlers in play for now. I'm just going to spaced down a little bit in our code, a little bit longer of a function. I need to create my paragraph elements. Let's call this first paragraph. So we'll say first paragraph. And we're going to, document dot create element, which is going to be a P element. This is going to be a paragraph element. That's the first thing we do. So we made our paragraph element here in the virtual in memory right now. That's what I want to do. And after we've made our paragraph, we need some content for that. So P dot first paragraph dot text content, right? We want to say that this is our, I'm going to make a capitals, this is a very short paragraph. There we go. And it's not much of a paragraph, more like a line, but that's okay. And that's the text content of first paragraph, yay. And what I want to do now, instead of appending child, which would go on the bottom, I want to kind of go in between, and there's something called insert before. But we need to get a reference to the parent node in order for us to do that. Right now, the parent node is called the content area. But if I just did content area dot append or insert before, it doesn't kind of work. It's almost like I need to get the parent div tag. That's what I need to do. So we're going to make a let. We're going to call this the parent div, right? Which is the content area dot parent node. And this is something where I had issues with yesterday. I had to do this first. So I get the parent node. And if I hover over parent div now, you can see that this is a node and parent node. That's kind of weird. Parent div is declared, but its value is never read, of course, because we never did anything, right? So you see that parent div is this parent node. So what I want to do is I want to take this and I want to insert it before my h2 tag. That's what I want to do. So going back down here, I want to say that the parent div insert before, and then I want to point to a couple things. The child node that I want to add, which is my first paragraph, and then the reference node that I want to add above, which is my h2 tag. All right. So if everything goes well, and again, there might be a problem in terms of a couple things here, and I just want to mention this, right? I'm already entering the h2 tag dynamically. So the h2 tag is actually not existing yet. I'm trying to insert before, and if this fails, we'll just do it on the h1 tag. But let's see how this works, okay? So if I did this, then I'm getting the parent div, the parent node, and I'm attaching a child object to the parent node. So I'm going to go back here, and hey, we don't have that thing. What do we get? We get an error. What error do we get? It's important to understand. In the console, we said, uncaught DOM exception failed to execute insert before a node. The node before, which is the node is to insert, is not a child of this node. Remember we talked about this? Because officially, until we've come down here, there's no child. So then, what if, and I'm just going to do this, I want to get a reference to the display for this hello world node, which is an h1 node. So I'm looking for a tag by h1. Let's do it that way. Okay, so I want to kind of attach it there. Because the one we have right now, which is our h2, we're kind of adding right now, right? So that's kind of a weird thing. We're kind of adding it, and it's kind of showing us this little issue. One thing also to note, if we want to do some troubleshooting, if I do a console.log, and I kind of put in the parent div, I want to show what that is, so do the parent div before we have this issue. And then when we go do here, we can see that this is indeed our div tag, right? And you can see that the div tag includes, well, everything, right? So that parent node is a parent node and an element, right? That's what that is. And again, if you look up this problem, and I kind of did this yesterday, so I want to kind of talk about it again today, is I want to insert before. So I want to say document.insert before. And if you look at the insert before from a web API perspective, and it talks about some examples of how it's done, you need a parent node. And then you're going to insert before the parent node. This is key, parent node, whatever the parent node is. And this is the parent of the newly inserted node, okay? And you need a reference node, and it gives you a little bit of code. So let's take a look at this. So notice that I'm doing parent div I'm getting it, I'm getting the parent node, and once I have the parent node, as an example, then I want to get this parent div insert before my new node, which is this one, some span element that this guy created. And, but I'm also getting a reference to an actual element, a child element, right? And this child element is something that already exists. It's not something that doesn't exist yet, right? It already exists. So how can we get an element that already exists in the page, not one that I'm creating in my virtual DOM kind of thing? How do I do that? Let's do that part first and let's fix it. So I'll leave this example up and then talk about this. So the reason why this isn't working is because my H2 is hasn't really done it. Remember, this happens kind of automatically. It happens like the same time, right? And I want to get a reference to the other thing that I want. So I did this properly, parent node. So parent div is equal to my content area. And content area, which is way up here, I did this document.getElementById content area. And if you actually did the example, if I just did parent, just to show you this, I'm not going to leave this, parent node, right? If I did parent node, and I hover over, you're going to see the same thing, node and parent node, right? So I don't want that, but that's one thing that I need to do. The other thing I need to do is get a reference to the H1 tag. So a couple ways I can do that. I can get element by tag name. There's only one H1 tag on the page right now, so I could do that. So instead of the H2, let's get access to the H1, just to show you what the difference is. So again, I'm going to skip down here for a second. Skip down here. We know that this is true. This is okay. But now we're going to do another thing. We're going to say let H1 is equal to document.getElements. And look at this as get elements by tag name. Remember I said elements as opposed to element. What kind of thing is this going to return? An array. Yeah, an array. So get elements by tag name. I can put a tag name in there, and the tag name is going to be an H1. You can see that it finds an H1. And if I did this and I hover over H1, you can see that now I'm getting an HTML collection of type HTML heading elements. So every H1 element that's on the page, but that's what this is going to return, right? I don't want every one. I want the first one, right, in this particular case. And again, I'm not adding additional code here. I could add an ID. That would be the easiest way. Add an ID to the HTML tag, and if I add an ID, then I can hook into it that way too. But I want to try it a different way. There's other ways of DOM manipulation. So I want to go to the 0th element, the first element basically, is what I'm looking at. And now if I hover H1, you can see that it is indeed the HTML heading element, right? Not a collection. So that's what this is. So if I was to take this, which is existing, and then do this, would I still have a problem? Because I want to take my paragraph tag, right, which is this first paragraph. That's the new node that I'm inserting. Notice it says node to insert. That's the new node. And then my reference child, which is an H1 tag. I know for a fact that my H1 tag is a child of my first paragraph, or sorry, of my content area, right? This content area, I know for a fact. So if this doesn't work, there's some other problem. Let's go back and see how that works. So going back to this, going to this, and you can see that I'm still getting an error, right? I'm still getting an error. Uncaught exception, it says insert before on node. The node before where the node is to be inserted is not a child of this node, right? But it is. We know it is. And this is the problem that I was encountering last day, where I want to try and insert something in between, right? The other way to do it, and again, I'm just going to talk about this for a second. I'm just following the exact same thing here. You can see that, right? So here's document.getElementById, parent node, and then I'm using my parent div, insert before the new node, which is this one up here, whatever the new node is going to be, and then this, right? So that's case one. Case two is I have a non-existent node, it says, right? And I have my parent div, and I want to add in this new kind of node that I'm adding in, as an example. That's another way I could do it. And I can also define what it is, whatever this is, and I can add that in. And you see the parent div is always going to be defined by this thing called parent node. But what I found when when I was looking at this is, like it says here, there is no insert after. That would be beautiful, insert after this one. But you can also use node next sibling in order for me to do the same thing. So let's take a look at that as an option to do the next node, right? So again, what I want to do is insert before, and then you can see that I have two, an SP1, which is my span, and an SP2, which is some kind of child element. That's the reference element, and then I kind of look at SP2 as the parent node. So I want to insert after this one as an example, and I'm defining it right here, right? See, I'm defining it right there, and it's still not working, right? Which is kind of weird. The other way we can try and do that, again, in our code is actually create a parent node and then attach it as a child node. But let's look at the idea of next sibling. So this is another option. So node next sibling. And like it says, what this does is it counts a couple things. So there's a node obtained, for example, using node first child, right? So node first child is the first child of my the H1 tag. So that is going to provide me a node. And whatever the element is of next sibling, it's going to go to the next sibling, the next node on the same level as that one. All right. So again, you can see here some code. Var element is equal to document.getElement by ID, whatever that div tag is. Here's div1. Next sibling. All right. Next sibling. What would that be? If the element is the div1 tag, what is the next sibling? So, sorry? Yeah, the div2 tag, right? The div2 tag is the next sibling. So let's try and see how that helps us, right? Because it says siblings of div1. You can see that there's text, and it is a bit of a console log that they did, right? Siblings of div1 is text, div, text, script, it says. And let's see how that works for us. So what's next sibling, right? So if I go through this and I say, okay, well, how about let's just put a pause on this thing right now to figure out our problem, right? And what I want to do is I want to go to the next sibling of my H2 tag. So what would that be, right? Because I haven't really added the paragraph tag. This is something I've got in my virtual DOM. This is the parent div for now, and this is my new H1 tag, right? That I got a reference to. I got a reference to that H1 tag, right? So what is the next sibling of my H1 tag then? It should be the H2 tag, because I've added it in if everything goes well. Let's do that. So I say, well, I want to console then, console.log, my H1.next sibling, right? There's my next sibling. So what do I get there when I output that? And we'll go back to this, and you can see that I get this thing called text. Well, that's kind of weird, right? Because next sibling is not really what I'm expecting, right? And you can see what it is. There's previous sibling element, and this is an interesting thing. When we ever see this thing, you can see that I'm actually getting an object. So text is actually an object. And inside that object, we're going to get a couple things. One, some additional information. Previous element sibling is an H1 display 4. That's interesting. And next element sibling is an H2 display 6. So previous and next. Node type is 3, code name, or node name is .text, and my base URI is because I'm using a local server, that's what this means. Am I connected? Yes, I am. My parent node is my div content area.jumbotron. That's the parent node. The parent element is my div content area.jumbotron. That's my parent node. And then we can look at a child nodes list. Child nodes list, which is a bunch of nodes. There's also first child and last child. All right, so these are all things we can access, but we've been unable to look at these different things, right? So again, we got a parent node, we got a parent element. We also have a previous element sibling and a next element sibling, and also a previous sibling and next sibling, right? So let's try this. So instead of this one, next sibling, let's say it's next element sibling and see what I get. Next element sibling, we can see that it's an H2 tag. That's good. That's an H2 tag. So maybe what I need to do is I need to insert, or I want to insert after my H1 or insert before my H1's next element sibling, whatever that is, right? Because that is actually something that works. It's okay, we got that. What about this? What is my H1 dot parent element or parent node? Let's see what that is. So if I go H1 dot parent element, and this is where we get a little funky. We get the whole thing, right? We don't want the whole thing. We just want that div tag. So that's something. How about else? If I go H1 dot, if I type in parent node, okay, parent node, again, you're going to see something very similar where you have this whole thing happen. So parent element, parent node, no problem. What about H1 dot parent div? Okay. And now it's undefined. So we never really did a parent div. We never defined it. And so therefore, there's no parent div. Right, so there's a bunch of options, but that's definitely one of them. So parent element, parent node, as an example, and then we could figure what that is. So if we know that I want to insert before the H2, what about if I did, instead of doing this, parent div, insert before, we can also use some of the information we have to do it. We can say that, what is our console log? What is our H2.parent node? What is that? Because that would help us kind of describe what this is. So H2.parent node, you can see now I have this again. So you can see it does find this whole parent node, which is what I want. This gives me an idea that we can use this directly as opposed to kind of get a reference, because it detects that this is indeed the parent node. Okay, so if that's true, couldn't we just do h2.parent node insert before, because we can do something called element chaining. That's what we're doing here. We're kind of chaining one thing to the other. Insert before that one, and I want to insert the new child, which is my paragraph, first paragraph. And then the reference child, which would just simply be the H2, which we know is there because I just got the parent node from it, right? And then we're good. So it's kind of a really roundabout way of doing it, but it's totally possible to do. So there's my little short paragraph. That's where it is, and it kind of put it in between, even though it is definitely a kind of a virtual element. It doesn't matter. My first thought was the correct thought, which is, oh yeah, for sure we got access. But isn't this interesting that my H2, my content area, parent node, right, is not the one I want. I don't want this. I should, if I want to rewrite this, I can say it's my H2's parent node. My H2 parent node is it's going to be stored here in my parent div, and then I can replace this part with my parent div, just like I wrote earlier before, parent div, insert before, and I'm inserting before my H2, and if I go back, you can see now it still works. So that's what we have to do. We have to get the parent node of the H2 tag and use the H2 tag as a reference node to kind of insert before, and that works perfect. So this is the exact same thing you're going to have to do, right, when it comes to doing things in the DOM for yourselves. Here's another thing we want to do. If I want to insert before H1 tag, the same thing. I want to insert the same element before my H1 tag. I want to have my first paragraph in there twice. Can I do that? So I want to do the same thing. I want to say that long form, h1.parent node, right? Here's my h1.parent node, dot insert before, and this time I want to insert my first paragraph again. Can I insert my first paragraph again before my H1 tag? And if I press save and enter, well, look, I've moved it actually. I can't do the same one because it's a reference, it's a pointer, but I definitely can move it up here. I can move it wherever I want. And if I look at my elements, just to kind of see what's happening here, and if I go into my body tag, just to, to view what's going on, and if I look inside my main, just to give you a slice of this. So here's my H1, and before this one, now I've put in my P tag, my paragraph tag, right? I don't make a copy of it. There is no copy, right, of this thing. I'm actually doing a move. So when I do this, and then I do this right after, it's the same paragraph tag, the same one. I'm not making a new one, right? I'm not inserting it as a value. I'm inserting it as a reference. That's what I'm doing, which is huge. It's huge. It talks to how JavaScript is object-oriented, which is very interesting, okay? So that's one thing that we can do here. Does this make sense? I know it's kind of jumbled. Like the way we've been writing it so far is like we're doing this, then we're doing this, then we're doing this, then we're doing this. And probably what I would do is break some of these things down into separate functions. I want to add, an element, right? And in fact, maybe that's what I want to write. I want to write a little function, right, where I want to add an element, as an example. I want to write the type of element that I want to add. So let's say, for example, I want to add an H1. I pass in the element type, whatever I want to add. I want to pass it where I want to add it. Do I want to add it before or after? What kind of thing do I want? And how can I do this? So it's a little bit more advanced, but it gives me a little thing because look, I'm kind of doing the same thing. I'm hooking in, adding some content, and configuring. So this again, just to go over the details of the DOM. Here, what I'm doing is I'm getting a reference, right? Actually, sorry, I'm creating, in this case, I'm creating a new paragraph tag or element. Let's call it an element, right? Here, I'm configuring the new element, right? Here, what I'm doing is I'm getting a reference, get a reference to the parent node, right, of the new element. And then what I'm going to do is once I get this reference to the parent node, I want to insert before the parent node, right? And I want to get a reference to the paragraph of the H2 element. That's what I want to do. And then I insert before. Here, this way, if I did it this way, this get a reference to the first H1 tag. That's what this means. And here what I want to do is I want to insert before. So this one I should probably put in just to reorganize my code a little bit over here. So this inserts the new paragraph before the H2 tag to element. That's what this does. Here I get a reference to the H1 tag, and when I do it again, this part, what I'm really doing when I do it again, I move the paragraph tag, above the H1. Why? Because I'm moving it by reference. It's passing it by reference into this insert before. I'm not passing it by value. Okay? Another thing is if I made a another element as an example. I made another element called paragraph 2, right? And I want to make a copy of the paragraph. So let's try this out. So let's say I want to say let's another paragraph, right? And I want to make a copy. Well, I can't really do it so easily. I can say first paragraph. What options do I have for this, right? So I have text node, access key, after, align, animate. And if I scroll down in this, you can see I have a list of child nodes, how many children it has, a class list, the class name, if there's anything associated with it, contains, data set, and so on. I can get attributes, I can has attributes, I can hidden, I can get the ID for it, the inner HTML, and so on. But one thing I can't do is, if you notice, is there's no real way I can say I want to get a copy, not this way, from one element to the other. There's a bunch of, by the way, notice all these, we talked about event listening and event handling yesterday. Notice that there's all these on events. All these on events, and by the way, I don't recommend them. I recommend actually add event listener. What these on events do, I could certainly do this as well. And this also attaches an event listener, but it attaches a very specific one. For example, on mouse out. only attaches a mouse out event. And for the most part, the recommendation from the community is we don't use on anything anymore. We use add event listener. So it's there just to support from a backwards compatibility perspective, but we want to get away from using on, mouse down, and so on. We want to use add event listener. But there's all the different kinds of events for the most part are right here, right? So again, so if I go down, you can see I can remove child. I can remove a specific child. I can do that as well. So if we want to remove something that's already there, I can add it, and then I can remove it. I can add a tag name, the title of a particular element. I can add a title if there's one, but there is no copy element. There is no copy element. I can't really do that. And so let's do a brief search and see what we can do if I want to copy one element exactly in the DOM. So making my own DOM, I want to copy an element. So again, DOM copy element, right? So notice there is a, it says clone node. That's the element that we can use. So again, we have, here's an example of this. We have, and this is W3 schools, got to give them this, whatever the element is, dot clone node is true, and we pass it into this new object, right? So let's see if that really works, right? So let's say clone node. So we said after another paragraph, we're going to make the same one, and we're going to call this the first paragraph dot clone node, right? And then is it true or not? And the answer is it's true. So we want to copy this. We're going to clone this node and store a reference to it here. Okay, cool. So now, let's go back to here and let us, after we've cloned the other paragraph, I want to have two of these. I want to have one that is my first paragraph, and the second one, the second paragraph, I'm going to put on the H1 tag. Let's use this one instead of my first paragraph. Once I've done that, let's see how this works. This is, let's just make this in, copy. So we're making a deep copy or a value, copy by value, more or less, from one element to another. That's what it's really doing, or we're making a new element by taking the information, the properties of this element, and copying them over to this one. Really what's happening is we're attaching properties that already exist on this one. We are attaching the same properties over here because it's a prototype. All right, so let's see if that works. So if I go back, and then if my expectation is that we'd have two, but actually we do one here and one here because we made a copy, right? So we made a copy of the first one. So that's very useful. So if I want to make, for example, the exact same element a bunch of times, I want to scaffold it out, virtually in the DOM and then modify it. This is great from that perspective. I can do this DOM manipulation stuff this way. So this is another way. So I've got get elements by tag name. That's one thing we talked about. And we can also use get elements by class name. That's another way we can do it. And there's many other options for hooking into elements. That's one thing we've been talking about this week. Okay, how do I connect to elements? How do I copy elements? And how about how do I delete elements? Okay, so now at the end, I want to remove an element. I want to remove the last child. I want to remove the last child of my list. I want to remove the first child. How do I do that, right? So there's last child and first child. So let's do this. Let's do, okay, I want to get, just like we did before, the parent div, which is the parent div of my H2. I want to get the parent div, and I want to get its last child. So I want to console log parent div last child, right? And what is it that I get? So if I save it, I get this one, H2. There's my H2. So I want to get this. I know I want to remove the H2, so I want to remove the last child somehow. And last child removal is actually quite common. But let's say I want to parent div last child dot, and I want to remove this one, right? I want to remove. So document dot remove child, and let's see what I need. I need the old child that I want to remove. That's my document remove child. Can I do it this way? So I want to get the parent div last child. And if I did this, I'm going to get a document exception again. It says, failed to execute remove child on node. The node to be removed is not a child of this node. Same thing that I got last time, right? Well, because what's happening is this isn't document, it's parent div dot remove child's parent div last child. Let's try that. And you can see now that it's removed my second paragraph. So that definitely is how it works. We learned from the last one. So what about if I want to remove first child's? So remove last child's. How about remove first child's? So remove first child's, right? And it took away, what did it take away? This one here. This is the H1 tag. This is the H2 tag. I don't think it took anything away. Let's just check to see if that's even a thing. So let's go into elements and go to body. And let's inspect these a little bit. And you know, it's good practice to do this kind of over and over again to make sure we see what we have. So we have a paragraph tag before the H1 tag. You know, we've got this here. We've got H1 tag, a P tag, and an H2 tag. But I'm trying to remove the first child's. Parent.remove child, first child. How about this? The parent div child nodes 0. That's also a thing because I have a bunch of child nodes and I want to get the 0th child node, and remove that one, right? So again, going back, you see that there's no effect. What about if I want to remove child node 1? How do I do that? So you can see that worked. That took the child node, the first child node, that's gone, right? So I did that. How about if it's child node 2? Now this is, you have to know which child node it is, right? So child node 2 gets rid of that one. Child node 3 gets rid of the other one, right? And so on. But how many child nodes do I have? 0, 1, 2, 3, right? That didn't really get rid of any. But what if I get rid of child node 50? Is there such a thing? Is it going to even error out? And the answer is, it'll just will work. And it won't do anything. If I want to also do number of nodes, I can say there, I can say console.log, you know, my parent div dot number, so I want to say child, I want to put child nodes, I want to say number of children, so I want to know how many children it has, right? So children, and notice when I hover over children, it gives me an HTML collection, right? Children, and then children dot length. I want to have how many children that I have, right? So let's see how many children does my parent div have when I go to my console. I got 4 children, right? 4 children. So does that make sense? Well, there's 0, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, it makes sense, right? So I want to get. What if I want to wipe out all of them? I want to just kill all the children. So I can do a little for loop to get rid of them all. So let's try this out. So I'll do one of these. I'll say for, and again I'll use let, not var. For let index is equal to 0, where index is less than the parent node. So again, it's going to be the parent div dot child nodes dot length. So it's less than this. Then what I want to do is index plus plus. I want to kind of loop through each of the child nodes. This is one way of doing it. There's also another way, right? We're going to use another way of doing this. I'm looping through each of the child nodes. Let's print them out first of all. Let's do a console.log, and then I'm going to look at the parent node. Sorry, parent div dot child nodes, and then index. So that's what I want to do. Whatever the index is, let's print it out. So print out all the child nodes in the parent. Let's see what they are. You can see that these are all the child nodes. So I got this one, this one, this one, and this one, but I also have these 2 little things here. These 2 things. So, but these definitely kind of describe each of these nodes. Okay. just to give you an idea of all the stuff that we're seeing here. And we also have this hashtag text that's in there as well. All right, so there's only 4 child nodes. And what I want to do is I want to wipe all of them away. So I don't want anything that appears on my screen anymore. I want to wipe them all away. So instead of console log this, I want to go and delete each of the child nodes, as an example, inside of my parent. So how do I do that? And again, what I would do is I want to look at my child nodes index. So let's say, for example, again, I'm going to look at parent div dot remove child, and then it's going to say whatever the child is, the old child. I want to remove it. I want to take this parent node child nodes index, this one, which gives me each of the children, right? And let us define this as my child node. So I'll say that let child node is equal to this. And to show you this, before we do this part, let's just do a console log of my child node, right? So it kind of goes through, finds each of the ones, attaches it to this little variable here, and then we're going to do that. So you can see we're getting each one, right? Each one in succession. Each child node is printing out, right? If I just did child node 0 every time, it's going to print that out a bunch of times, and you can see that it doesn't give me much of anything except for text. So this is child nodes. The other thing I want is child nodes dot, and you can see that there's additional information. We can go further down the pipe, because this is further down. I can add that particular one. I can say that what I'm looking for is the inner HTML. Maybe that's what I want, my inner HTML, if it's possible. In this case, the child node's inner HTML is not accessible through my child nodes array. It's not, because it would have been listed here. Excuse me. So, but definitely, if I want to delete, what is it going to delete? That's the question. So child nodes is what I want. And if I delete this, so if I say parent div, we're going to get an error. But if you go child node, because that's the one I want to get rid of, and if I go back, we didn't delete everything. We did delete some of it. Take a look at that. We deleted 2 things, but not the other ones. Why is that? So very short paragraph, and a secondary header was still there, but not all of the indices were gone. Well, because if you look at what my parent div is pointing to, right? Let's take a look at my parent div. Parent div is the H2 parent node, right? Isn't that interesting? Because the H2 tag has been added afterwards, right? Then that's gone, right? So what if I made that the parent div was actually the H1 tag? You know, that would be different. That would be a different scenario. I would remove different children, right? But you can totally do it. So this gives you some hints as to what to do in terms of inserting before. It's not that difficult. So a couple of ways of doing it that I recommend. If I'm going to insert before these things, so one thing I could do is I could preemptively inject you know, an item, like some kind of ID for each of these items. And that's not a terrible idea anyway. A lot of times what I want to do is have an ID for each of my links. So for example, home, you know, so I could say something, here's my class, and now question for you is this. I'm going to add a whole link. I'm going to add a whole link. And what I want to do is I want to insert before. So inside the list item itself, in my list item, and this is something that we have to think about. My list item itself could have an ID, so ID of, and let's add in an ID of home, right? I can have that. And I can also have an ID of, just to make it easier, this one would be products, if I'm not wrong, right? Well, this makes it super easy if I did this. Like super easy if I did, you know, kind of products. This is not necessarily wrong, okay, because we're going to need to do this later anyway. Products, and then this is services, and we'll call this about and contact, ID about and then ID is contact. So there's definitely, you can do it this way. Now, if you're going to hook in dynamically and you don't care about which one it's going to be, again, I would connect to the UL. The UL has a class of navbar, nav, ml auto. I could hook in that way. Or I can make sure that this one is the first unordered list. Get elements by tag name, UL, 0. The first element that's returned, the first UL that's on the page, the first navigation list if I want, right? And then once I do that, I can go through a list of all the items, go to the bottom item or whichever one I want to, insert before. I can get the parent node, which will be the UL, and I insert before that tag and do it that way. But this way it might be easier as well. So let's suppose in here, I want to get rid of all the items on the nav bar, everything, right? How would I do this? How would I get rid of every item in the nav bar? If I was going to, this is not part of your assignment, but we should be able to do this now. So if that's true, going back to this, I want to hook into the UL. So let's do that. So we're going to say that the let my UL is equal to get elements by tag name, and the tag name is going to be UL. You got to go? Are you okay?
Yeah.
But I want to get the first one, right? So the 0th element. So now if you look, it's just the UL, it says, is of type any. Now why is that? Right? Get elements by tag name. I'm not getting code hinting, but it's UL, okay? And if I was going to print this out, let's just, again, before I do anything, I always like to kind of inspect and do a bit of a log. What is my UL? What does that look like? And it says that get elements by tag name is not defined at start. Oh yeah, of course I need to use document. Yeah. And now you can see that I've got my UL, and it includes all my navigation plus all my IDs. Okay, cool. So I want to wipe all of those out. So that's my UL element. So then I could use another for loop. I could go for each, and this is another way of doing a for each loop here. The array that I'm looping through is the array of each element in my array, in my objects. I can say ul.child nodes. So that is the array, right? The ul child nodes. And for each li, right? For each li, notice that there's a fat arrow function. That is a new way of doing it, right? For each li in this list, then what I want to do is I want to, let's remove it, that kind of thing. So I can say, ul dot remove child, and then the li. Let's see if I can do this, if that's possible to do. I mean, it seems regular, but let's see. If it worked, then we would just remove all these children, but it seems that they're still there. Let's see if that is an issue. And because otherwise these would be gone, right? So let's do this. Instead of removing them, let's print them. So let's go, okay, console.log, I want to go from the li. Let's see if I'm getting the actual list items. And let's see what we get. Now we're getting this funky thing again happening. So I can list them all. Here they are, right? So home, product, services, about, contact. That I can do, but I get also this extra thing. Each one of these has this extra text thing that I'm getting here, right? So for each list item, I want to remove the list item, right? Just the list item. So that can work, right? I can get rid of the list item. But notice the list item itself has also an anchor tag, and inside that I have an I tag, and this is kind of the nodes inside of my object, right? All right. How about instead of getting rid of them, I hide them? That's also something I can do, right? I can do something like li dot each of the list items, and then this is something you can also see, right? Styles. So I want to do my style You know, and remember what this is, right? Each li, if I hover over it, it's a child node. Child node really, yeah, it does it, right? It kind of, you know, kind of sets this up. But it's almost like I got to do something else. I got to do something else with child nodes. So child nodes contain, I can check to see what it contains. I can look at my last node, that there is a child. Child nodes also can have other nodes, of course. That's something I can do. I can remove. Let's see what that does. Li remove child node dot remove, and removes the node. Okay, let's see if that works. So li remove, right? And let's see what I get now. Well, nothing. Didn't really do anything. It's the exact same thing as last time. So it didn't really do anything because it's like I haven't been able to do that, right? So using this for each loop, I can list each item. I definitely can go through a list of child nodes for each of the UL, the items, but that's something else. What about other things? What else can I do? So if I go UL dot up here, I can definitely style the UL at this level, right? But once I go into, I start typing children, so child nodes or children, right? What does children do for me if I hover over it? Well, children gives me an HTML collection. So that might be something. Instead of child nodes, I want to go children. Okay. Let's see. So again, we're just exploring this whole thing. So again, I'll go children. Okay, cool. Well, I like that a lot. And I want to, for each child node, let's print that out. So console, let's see what I get now. Console log, you know, li. So for each of the list items, what do I get? So UL children for each is not a function at start. UL children for each, because children itself, even though it describes a HTML collection, looks to me that I can't loop through this one, right? Collection. So what does UL children do? Let's just toggle this, and we'll just block comment that one. Let's try this out. So we'll say that console.log ul.children. Here's my children, right? And let's see what I get when I do that. So I get this HTML collection. There's 5 elements, right? The 0th collection is this. The first collection is this. This is a different thing than what I did before, right? I might be okay here, but this looks to me like I can loop through it. Not a for each loop, but maybe a for loop. I have a length of 5, so children.length. Let's try that instead. So I can say that instead of a for each loop, I can say for, and again I'll say let index is equal to 0, where index is less than my ul.children.length, right? Just like we did before, index plus plus. Okay, so I want to do this now, and I want to print out each individual child. I want to say that, so again, I want to console log, see if I can do this, you know, the ul.children, and then index. Okay, so each one of those, see what the difference is between child nodes and this is what I like. This is good. This is beautiful. This allows me to see each individual child nicely, right? So that is control, right? That makes sense. I can do this, which means I should be able to wipe out each one of these. If I say that let, like we did before, let child node, or child, we'll call it child this time because it's not a node anymore, is equal to this. Let's say I take this and put it here. Then I print out, I see what that is. You can see if I hover over now, I have this child as an element. That's good. That's a nice thing. I want to delete or remove, but the problem is that, remember what remove does. Remove, can I remove the child? So can I go child.remove, right? And notice if I hover over remove, it says removes a node, right? Child node.remove, like this, right? Yeah. Except for, it did everything except for the last 2. So why is that again? It's like it went through, looped through, got rid of everything but not these two. Why is that? And let's take a look at what I got. So if I go to console, so elements, and if I go to my body tag again, and I want to go to my nav, and I want to scroll down until I see my, here's my button, which is this thing. And this is my my div. Here's my UL, and you can see that I've got 2 children left, products and about. And it kind of wiped out a couple things randomly. It got rid of home, and it got rid of services, right? But it kept products and about, as an example. It did that stuff completely. That's okay. Products, it wiped out everything except for these two, and it seems to be that there's no rhyme or reason for it. Like, why keep those but wipe out the other ones? It's not like I protected those. Contact us is gone, so the last element's gone. The first element's gone, right? And then there's a middle element that's also gone, services, right? But not the 2 other ones. It's just like it didn't go and wipe out everything for some reason or another. And it's pretty bizarre how that would work, right? Because, I mean, you know, we're doing the exact same. We're saying remove on each of the children. So first I get a child, I remove that child. Here's something that the reason why it happened. Because of this. I counted the length, and when I remove, what happens is it readjusts the length of my my UL dynamically. This is what's really happening here. So if you notice what's going on, I do a remove, but I'm removing it in the midst of my for loop. So what's the first element that I removed? The 0th one, the first element. Okay, now I have only, instead of 5 elements, I have 4 elements. Okay, 4 elements. Okay, cool. Now I'm going to go to element 1. What's my element 1? Well, it's home products. So I go to the next one, which is, now it's my new element 1, services. Get rid of that. Okay, now it rejigs again. So products is 0, right? About is 1, right? And contact us is 2. And then I'm getting rid of the contact us, gone, right? And then, you know, I leave the, or about us, and then I leave the contact. I leave, you know, that's how it goes. So it actually rejigs this in real time, and it doesn't maintain the length of my object. It's not, I remove the children, but it also changes the size of my array as I go, which is bad. So for loop may not be the right thing to do. I can't loop through each of the objects and remove them, you know, the same way. I can't do that as a reference. I can't do that. What I could do is I could make a reference copy of each of these objects in another array and then get rid of them. That would be the other way of doing it. But I can't do it this way, because when I do it this way, I get a reference to each of these things, and I literally pull it out of existence. And then what happens is it shifts. It doesn't attach 0 to that element. It doesn't like leave nothing there. What we'd expect to do is that it would just like get rid of it, but I'm counting. And now when I count the index is now changed. It's pointing at a different element, not the same element that it was pointing at before, but something else. And that's why this is kind of a weird thing to do. Okay? Removing the last element, though, if I want to get rid of the last one or hide the last one, let's say, for example, I want to hide all of them. I'm not removing everything. Instead of child.remove, I want to say child dot, and I want to do the, just like we've done before with the, you know, kind of a set attribute. I can set an attribute for all these ones. I can change my class. Or if I go to class list, I can do that. I can change my class name. I can do all those kind of things, no problem, right? But one thing I can't do is if I go style, right? And if I go style dot, and if I want to change this to display is equal to none, that's what I really want to do. That's just like using CSS, right? I want to go through there and nick all of those ones. I'm not removing them anymore. So theoretically, if I did this, then there's nothing in the list. Because even though they're physically there, so if I go into my nav, so hiding is a lot easier. Hiding, you know, if I go to my nav bar and if I go into my div tag, you can still see that I have all my children there. They're just display none. They're just hidden. And what I've injected is actually a style tag inside of my list items. So that's how it works. So then it looks like I have nothing in the nav bar, but actually they're still there. So a lot of times hiding is so much easier than removing. Removal is it can be challenging. Hiding, not so much. Right? All right, so we did some more DOM manipulation. I wanted to go over that with you guys because you know, for the stuff that we're doing for lab, I wanted to kind of do an extensive view of that and to get some, you know, kind of more stuff with the nav bar. Even though you're working with the nav bar now, it's much easier to do this with what we've done. So I can also, I've shown also what a for loop looks like, what a for each loop looks like as an example. And notice how my for each loop didn't really work for children, right? However, a for loop worked just fine. ul.children for each doesn't work so much. Like for example, let me put that back. If I just did a console log for each of the children, and by the way, this arrow function for each child in child is what this is, right? For each child in child. There's also another kind of for loop I've got to talk about. So if I go for, there's for each, and there's also for in, right? This is another way of doing a for loop, for in. So for in object, right, as an example. So for in does objects. Let me do another one. There's also for of. So whatever the iterator of is of the object, I can do that. I can say for every child of my object, which is children, right? So let's do a console log as an example of that child. Let's see what that is. So here's my child. Let's get rid of this. That's another for loop that we can do. So what does it look like? It says children is not defined. Children. Ha ha ha. You can see that it does the same thing, right? So that's okay. So for a for of, that's also a loop. It's almost like a for another kind of. Let's try the for in again. So for in, this one. So for key in object, and this one kind of shows the key. Let's get rid of this. So what object can I have in the key? We can say that the key is my list item, and my object is ul.children. And if I tried to show this, if I said, okay, here's my key, let's do a console log of my key, then again, you're going to get this. That's a different thing. So it kind of gives me something that's different. The key, for the key in the object, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, it kind of gives me a list. These are the indices of the object plus a bunch of other stuff, the length, the item, and the named item. So something else. So for in is great for classes, objects that I want to kind of go through and use. For of, it works like a for each, and for each, which is my classic for each now, for each. This classic for each, I got to do ul.children, so that is the collection, right? And the element would be, we'll just call it child. And then what I want to do is if I do a console.log child, then we're going to get this because ul children for each is not a function at start. So for each it doesn't like. It has no liking for child in this particular case, especially since children is not the kind of collection that's compatible. But if I put child nodes, oh, well, that's different, right? Then you're going to be good, child nodes. And the other one I can do is child's, yeah, that's probably it. Children is one, and then child nodes, those are the two. Those are the two things that I can really do to it from a loop perspective. So child nodes is the other one I can use. So a bunch of different ones we can do, but this one definitely erases or hides all my child nodes by using that for loop. All right, so that's what I want to show. Now I want to put this up on GitHub, and I've already got a GitHub link. You can see that everything came back, right? So I've already got a GitHub link, and on the left in Visual Studio Code, you can see that this is one way I can do it. I can definitely go in here, and you can see that I've got some changes. It kind of denotes any changes that I have in my code. So anything I've modified, I modified my index.html because I added IDs for each of the elements in my nav bar, and I modified my app.js because I added all this other extra stuff that I put in here. So now what I want to do is I want to add these two items to my staging area. I want to do a git add dot, just like we talked about before. Remember, if I look at the loop that I need to do, I need to do a git add dot and a git commit minus m and the new message, whatever that new message is going to be. So we replace the initial commit with a new message for what I'm doing, right? I can do that with command line, or I can do that through Visual Studio Code. If I click here, you can see the changes. If I click this button, this is like doing git add dot. So let's do that. So there's git add dot. Notice you notice that it goes from changes to staged changes. I can also press minus and it unstages everything again, right? But here I want to add a commit message. This is my commit message. And I can say something like, what I really did was I, kind of demo for insert before, which is what I kind of wanted to show you today. And then if I click this check mark, it commits. So that's my commit. It's done. So now I've done a local commit. That's what I've done. And then I'm going to push it. I can use these ellipses to kind of push this up to GitHub. So I make that commit, and I push all the changes up to GitHub when it's done. There we go. And when I check, if I go to GitHub now, and if I refresh, you can see now that I have 2 commits. Right? 2 commits. So one thing I want from your lab is there's 2 things when you hand it in. One is the zip archive of the entire project. And the second thing is a link to your GitHub repo. The link to your GitHub repo is this link. Okay? Sometimes what I get is people giving me their account. I don't want your account. I want your GitHub link, which is the link to your repo. You got to go in your repo and give me this link. Also, don't go into your commits. Sometimes I get this. People go into their commits and they give me this link. That's not right either. It's got to be here. If you click on code, if you go to your repo, so it's got to show whatever your account name is, then there's a repo, and then you click code. It's this link. If you're really concerned, or if you don't know, if you go into clone or download, it also gives you the link. This is another link right here. So you can always give me this link. Right? Whatever you choose to do is fine. But either one of those is what I'd like you to give me, right? So once I have the repo, then your lab is complete, right? So I've got your repo and I've got your zip file. Also, sometimes what people do is they don't zip properly. One thing I will not do going forward, I'm just letting you guys know, is I'm not going to accept RAR files. So please don't use RAR, WinRAR in any way. I'm only going to accept zip files. So give me a RAR file. I'm going to send you a little message, friendly message that says, I'm not going to accept your RAR file. Please, resubmit with your zip file. Okay, I'm going to do that one time, and so that it gives you a chance to submit properly. Okay, so demo for submit before. What about if somebody up online added a README? So you working with a collaborator and someone adds a README. Let's do that. And the README says, okay, here's this is called Markdown, and each of the hashtags means like an H1. This 2 hashtags means an H2, which is demo project for lesson 2. That's what that is. And if I do that and go down here and go commit new file, then what happens is online, now I have 3 commits. But locally on my machine here, I'm 1 commit behind. If you go here as an example, you can also do, I can do a bunch of different things here. I can pull, that's one thing I could do here. I could kind of look through, and there's other GitHub commands that you can also issue that is something that we can look at. We can also do undo last commit. That's definitely something we can do. But if I do control backtick and I add a new terminal window, I can make as many of these as I want for the most part. I could do a git fetch. What git fetch does is it says, well, it kind of analyzes what I got up online, and it says that the delta is 1. That means the remote has 3, and I have, only 2, that means that definitely I'm behind by 1, right? That's what I do with git fetch. And going back to these changes now, you can see that I can definitely pull. It tells me to pull. I can do it here. I can also, if I look at this, I could also pull locally. So I can say like git pull. If I do that here, then what happens is it adds a additional file right here to my project, git pull, and you can see here, I can actually see the changes right from GitHub. So sometimes what you have to do is you have to pull. A lot of times what we want to do when we work with another collaborator, if I'm working with a partner, if I'm going to wait until you push, then I'll wait till you've done, and then I'm going to pull, and then we're in sync. However, that's not always the case. Sometimes I'm working on commit number 3, and so are you. So we have to do something called a merge. And that's where Git becomes, and GitHub becomes really challenging, right? So what's always best to do is create a separate branch. And again, I'm not going to be talking about branching too much in this course because it's out of scope. But really what we want to do is each user, each developer could have their own development branch. And then later on, that's based on some version of the master branch that they started working on. So they work on their own feature from the master branch. And then when they're done, they merge their branch with the master branch. Now the challenge with this is the big challenge, is if I have many users who are working on different features, then when we merge, we're going to have a merge party, right? Because there's going to be some merge conflicts, right? My commits and your commits, you've got commit number 3, 4, 5. Maybe there's only 2 commits right now in master, and I've got commit 3, 4, 5. Your 3, 4, 5 and my 3, 4, 5, different commits. So we have to merge all that together. Again, kind of out of scope for what this course is, but it becomes very interesting. Okay, so that's our README, and that ends what I wanted to talk about today. Oh, before we go, one thing I wanted to also talk about is a couple of tools that we use, very common tools we use with other than Visual Studio Code. One of them is SourceTree. So SourceTree, definitely a tool you can download for free if you don't like to use command line. If you're someone who doesn't like it, it gives you a very nice graphical representation of how Git in GitHub works. It talks about who the author is, and you can look at different branches and a bunch of stuff, and it's, again, very, very visual. The other one that I like using a lot is Gitkraken. Gitkraken is, if you're going to use a UI, this is pretty good too, right? Gitkraken definitely gives you a visual representation, if you want to look, a visual representation of your UI, just simply like this. So it's very, very similar to what we saw in SourceTree. And it allows you a little bit more visual control of what's happening, which is pretty cool. So that's Gitkraken. And then, of course, GitHub also provides a free tool called if you go to Windows, GitHub. Sorry, it's a desktop GitHub, right? Then if you go to GitHub Desktop, then GitHub also provides this, which is another tool, right? So this is what this looks like. There isn't as much of a graphic view on this one, but it does give you things like the branch, it compares stuff, it does things with a tool, and you don't have to use command line. So that's pretty cool too. So GitHub also has this GitHub Desktop. It's right from GitHub, and it works okay. So that's that one. And there's others. Tortoise Get. Okay, there's Tortoise Get, another little client for GitHub. Very basic, and what it does is it actually doesn't give you a command line. It doesn't give you a UI, but it actually adds additional functionality on your own Explorer, on your File Explorer. So if you right-click, you can actually create repositories right from your File Explorer, as opposed to, and when it comes to merging, this is a really interesting tool. It's good. It's a good tool. It's very easy to do merging and branching and all that kind of stuff right here. Another tool that you can use. Okay, so a couple of tools if you don't want to use command line. Totally cool. Also, if you're programming with Visual Studio 2017 or 2019, there's always integrated extensions for Visual Studio that allow you to directly access, the command line equivalent. You can do some user interface commands, again, with no command line. If you're a Mac user, Xcode has GitHub, Git support built into it. And there's many other tools out there that do very similar things. Okay? So it's built into your IDE. So questions around all the stuff we talked about today. We covered a lot of things, more DOM stuff, a little bit more about event handling we talked about again. And next week, we're going to go into a whole other section about things that we're going to be covering. But remember, next week, your Lab 1 is due. Lab 1 is going to be due next Friday at midnight. Okay? Questions? Awesome. So that's it for me for this week. And then we'll touch base again next week when I see everybody starting off on Monday. All right? That's great. Thanks a lot. Let's go in there and stop streaming.